there's actually a plasma structure in the known universe that, get this, is 137 billion
You say
light
B billion or million?
B with a B. It's 137 billion light years long. Now, if do the math, folks. If light is traveling at 186,000 miles approximately per second, then that's 60 times 24 times 365 times 137 billion.
I heard you before say it's so many Milky Way
It's
galaxies or something like that.
it works out to approximately 344,000 diameters of the Milky Way galaxy. That's one plasma structure in the universe. Now, folks,
How do physicists explain that?
well, that's my other problem. How does a structure like that arise and then keep itself together if, the great Alberts, you can't have any transmission of information faster than the velocity of, how does that system even arise? And, while we're at it, let's talk about the spiral character of galaxies. Well, when you get into this plasma stuff, you'll discover that there's a whole plasma cosmology out there. And I wrote about it in my book, The Cosmic War. So I'm going back to what I told people earlier. All of my books, I've been dancing around this plasma issue, the Nazi Bell, the Philadelphia
Mhm.
Experiment, the Cosmic War, for a very long time. Thank you, Robert Temple, for being out there, having the guts to get out there and do the Plasma Life Hypothesis book, because I quite frankly was afraid to. Because people already think I'm a good candidate for a rubber padded room. Don't,
Well, my
I,
wife is a psych nurse, so
okay, thank you. Anyway, well, people have been talking about plasma cosmology for a very Hannes Alfvén, the Swedish physicist. He's a Nobel laureate physicist, so he's not a fly by night. Was talking about plasma cosmology for a very long time, and in my book, The Demon in the Acre, another reason I did the book is I have excerpts from Dr. Alfvén's major works on plasmas, and also a set of quotations from his student, Dr. Anthony Peratt. And people will be familiar with that name that have read my book, The Cosmic War. But basically, when you read Dr. Alfvén, it's very funny because, here's a guy who chooses his language very carefully, very carefully. And he talks about all the wonderful theories about plasma that were circulating in the 1950s, of course, in connection with the hydrogen bomb. And all the talk began about having controlled fusion as a really good way to produce lots of clean energy. And Alfvén is talking about all these controlled fusion experiments in his book, and I quote this, and then he says, but the plasmas did not cooperate with the theory. And, to use that kind of diction and ascribe agency to what he's experimenting with, I'm thinking, okay, here's another scientist that's encountered this very strange behavior of these plasmas. All right, so what's the strange behavior? Let's go back to David Bohm. When Bohm was working on the Manhattan Project and making uranium plasmas, he discovered a very interesting thing. Every time that he put in an electrical probe inside the plasma to take measurements of what was going on inside of it, the plasma would react by constructing a sheath, a kind of electromagnetic sheath around the probe, so that the probe wouldn't work and he could take no measurements. Now, folks, like it or not, that is exactly the same kind of response as your body has when a bacterium or virus or germ enters your immune system, and that's exactly what your immune system does. It encases that foreigner with a lot of cells so that thing cannot attach itself to your body. That's what it does.
Isn't our neurons and electrical signals basically some other type of plasma?
Well, this is the other thing. If you look at, and I put these pictures in the book, if you look
Beautiful
at,
cover too. I love the cover. Love
well,
the
yeah,
cover.
if
Awesome
you
cover.
if you look at well, we'll get to the cover in a minute, but if you look at the structure of plasma filaments in the universe and then compare them to the structure of neurons and synapses in a brain, they are remarkably similar. In fact, I would go so far as to say you're dealing with identical structure. And this is why many people in the plasma cosmology hypothesis, the plasma life hypothesis, are thinking in terms that this means that these gigantic plasma structures like the Great Sloan Wall that have been around, almost forever, might have intelligence. Well, stop and think about that. If you're dealing with something that has intelligence and a memory that's 137 billion years old, that's kind of off the charts when it comes to us. So yeah, if what I'm getting at here is that the plasma life hypothesis appears to be coming around to the ancient traditional view that angels and demons are quite literally the intellectual bodiless powers. That's what the ancients would call them. Why? Because in terms of our materiality, they're basically immaterial. But as Damascus says, in comparison to God, they're still material. They're just much, much, much less dense than we are.
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else? By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode. Members will also receive a private link to the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers. Behind-the-scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else. And that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5.